Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Kunjaman, along with Biju Daniel and Pastor Tinku Thompson.
And as we enter into a new year, so we have a very interesting topic today to talk related to the resolutions, which people take in the beginning of every year and regarding their life management.
And I just want to thank you, Pastor, for coming today again.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be with you both again for another episode.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. How are you, Biju?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
How's your New Year, everything going?
It's going good, not bad.
Yeah, busy?
Kind of busy.
Yeah, same here. How about you, Pastor? Busy?
Yeah, really busy. So I think what we are going to talk today will be mostly coming out of our experiences
Yes.
too.
Yeah, absolutely. As this new year starts, a lot of people have different resolutions. A lot of people have different things going on. What is the New Year's, service tradition in churches? Because different companies, different people have different things they do. But in the church, what's the tradition?
Okay, so there is no tradition, per se. I think what you are referring to probably, I guess, is more about the New Year services which are held in churches. Okay.
Yep, that's what I meant.
Yeah, that's a good question because we do see that many churches have something called as a New Year service, or some call us year-end service, some even call us watch night service. There are different names given. And typically what happens in those services, depending upon the size of the church, if a church is bigger, if a church is smaller, I think if it is somewhere in a manageable size, 50, 70, you would typically see most of the people testifying that night. And if the church is bigger, let's say 200 or 150 even, they reduce it to one person from the family giving a word of testimony. And if it's even bigger than that, I don't think there is this whole thing of giving testimonies. But, this is something, I would say there is no biblical mandate or doctrine or anything behind it. I think this is something which is done as a service. I really don't feel like there is anything wrong with that, as long as people understand that the intent is to just give glory to God and enter into a new year together as a church family and praising God. And, there are time zone differences, so it's not like, if you are in, let's say, Japan or China, and if you're in the US or, all time slots, time frames, time zones have different times where people enter the new year. So there is no uniformity. Even in US, East Coast people would enter 1 hour early. So it's just more of a good time, people reflecting upon what God has done in their life in the last year. And in some churches also there is I won't call it as a tradition, because a lot of people don't think that as a tradition, is to give verses, Bible verses. A lot of people testify that verse have been a guiding principle or very important to their life during that year. Mostly the pastors or whoever is preparing that will pray that, God will give people. And I think it's a good perspective, on the new year to get a verse. There is no harm in giving a Bible verse, but one thing I want to emphasize is there is no tradition per se, like that, and people should not think that it's a custom, and if 1 year if you don't do a New Year service, it's a sin or anything like that. It's more of a time for believers to get together and glorify God and just enter into a new year, praising God.
Thank you. And I'm sure that a lot of us, when we've been going ever since we were little, so that's where that tradition question probably comes in, where I'm sure you have been, Biju.
Yeah.
You've been ever since you were little.
Yeah, I've not been, because I was not born in a Pentecostal, household per se from the beginning, so I didn't have it from the childhood.
Yep.
But yeah, from long years I have also been going and attending and now conducting these New Year services. So
Yep.
I think more than a tradition, we should understand the intent of it.
Yeah. And also, one thing which we have noticed during the New Year service is that many people come and testify, as you said, like sometimes even one person from each family. So, and we have seen like people taking New Year resolutions and decisions on a New Year time frame, but can you let us know like why people take that specifically?
Yeah. I think it has got more to do with the fact that people always like new beginnings. I know of people who take new decisions on birthdays, because it's a milestone. They can remember, right, something. And I also know of people who sometimes take decisions on the first day of the month, thinking that, okay, next month I am going to do this. And some people even get to the point where they would say, if it's something significant, like, in some date which they can normally remember. So I think New Year is a good opportunity for people to start with new beginnings. Normally, if you go to any fitness center or gym or anything like that, you will see a lot of people in the first week of January. And it normally, what I've heard is it tends to go down after 15th, because a lot of people will take decision that we want to be fit and we want to do many things. I think there is no harm in making some good decisions, and it could be related to your family, it could be related to your spirituality, it could be related to your health. But I think the challenge is again to stick to it and go through it. And sometimes people take very strong decisions and they stick to it. I met a person recently who took a decision to lose some weight last year, and he lost about 40 pounds. It's hard work, but he was consistent.
He stuck to it.
Yeah. So if you do just for 15 days, that's not going to happen.
Right.
So I think one thing we have to understand. So I think it's a human tendency, and it's a good thing, but how we maintain that is important.
Yep. I can relate to it.
Same, me too. I can relate to it too. My gym is always packed in January, and then by March, it's the same old people there.
Yeah.
That always go. So,
Yeah.
So I know, with the new year and all the time, a lot of people are really busy with schedules. But a lot of people say they're busy, but if you actually look at their calendar, look at their schedule, they're not busy. In times like that, though, I know you manage a lot of different projects, do work. How do you manage your time on the many different things you have going on?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I would admit that I have not completely figured it out, because the more you think about it, it's a question which is I personally won't say that I figured everything out, but I can give you some guidelines about how I do, because definitely I do manage many things. And number one thing I would say is a priority in life. What is our priority? So there are certain things, and it depends upon the values we follow. And I say that we should have a life mission statement. So normally churches have mission statement, organizations have mission statement, but a lot of times we as individuals don't have mission statement. A few years ago, I nailed it down last year. I made a mission statement for my own life. So basically, once you have a mission statement, you have to make sure that everything you do is, just like any organization would do, aligns with your mission statement for your life. And you need to revise or review that mission statement, remind yourself that mission statement few times, at least a year or even more than that. The other thing I want to tell you is that you have to realize that you can't do everything. So there was a time in my own life where I used to feel guilty about everything I'm not able to do. I used to always have a long list of things to do. But we all know that time is a limited resource, and we only have 24 hours, and there is very, you can't compromise on, certain things. Like, for example, if you compromise on your sleep, you're going to have medical issues. So I compromised on my sleep at some point in the past, and I realized that that's not a good idea. So now I don't try to do that. So that's another thing. One more thing I want to say is you have to learn to say no before you say yes, and you cannot say no. What I mean by that is, that's a phrase I've heard a long time ago, but that's very important, because a lot of times we are so nice that we are not able to say no to things. And if we are not able to say no, and there will be a time where we will not be able to say no. So we have to understand our limits. Then one more thing I want to say is, don't feel guilty, as I said. If you can't do everything, don't feel guilty. I think as a Christian, what you should do, focus is, are you faithful with the time God has given? Let's say you are spending, 2-3 hours a day in front of TV or some things which are not, very productive. Then that means you're not faithful with your time. But at the same time, if you're utilizing your time, you should not be feeling sad about it. But one more thing I will add is we have to think about ourselves if we are being lazy or we are working hard, right? So that is something we can only think about ourselves and we can answer that. One thing I will conclude here in this question is we should budget our time. We normally budget money, but we should also budget our time. What I mean by that is we all know that we have how many hours in a week? 168? Is that true? Yeah.
I don't know
Somewhere
the
around
exact
that, yeah.
number.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
sounds
So
about
so
right,
seven,
yeah.
so 24 hours, and out of that, I have a budget of my time. I should have bought that, but I don't have it right now. So basically, you know that every month, every day, you have to sleep, let's say 7 hours or whatever time you need, and then you reduce that. Then if you go for a work, how much time? If you go to church, how much time? Then what are the things you needed for personal? So when you come up with all those things, and you have to put your all the things you're supposed to do and see whether you are really have time, and also prioritize to see that are you really focusing on things you should really do, or are you focusing on things which is of not much value. So I would add that it is a matter of value. And I have few more things I would say. I always focus on what will have eternal impact. I always think in from that perspective. Maybe later I can elaborate on that more. But what I mean to say is you need to really look at it a holistic way and prioritize it based on what are your priorities and what is your mission in your own life.
So just one more clarification, actually. So do you put like a calendar, or what specifically do you do? Do you have like a day calendar where you keep, specific tasks every day of exactly what times you can do stuff, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I normally do is I use some software, I use some tools.
Yeah.
I have a to-do list is a software I personally use, and there are many other. So basically what I do is there are some recurring tasks
Right.
which I need to do every day, and which I need to do every week, and which I need to do on some periodic basis. Then there are some tasks which I normally add and I prioritize it. But I will also one thing I learned through some other people is, a lot of times we feel very happy about having a list. We feel like, okay, now I have a list. Having a list gives you a feeling that things are under control, because if you don't have a list, you feel like everything is all over. But when you have a list, you feel like, okay, now I have in control. But that doesn't mean the task is done. Right.
Right, you
Having
gotta
a list,
complete it. Yeah,
list is not. So a lot of people struggle with this problem. They have a list, but they never do it. So what you need to do is, if you have something in your list, you have to make sure it gets into your calendar,
Right.
or in some way, whatever way works for you, that action can be taken on it. Let's
At
say
a
I
certain
need to.
time, or, yeah.
Yeah, let's say I need to work on a project. Let's say I need to do some paper. I need to write something. So I can add to the list, but it will always be there in my list. But I need to make sure that I find time in my calendar, I block time, and I do that. Otherwise, it's very difficult. And I'm not saying I have achieved perfection in that, but I'm trying my level best, because moving things from your to-do list to your calendar with dedicated time, will take you to success. Otherwise, a lot of times we go by feeling. We don't feel like doing things. So we'll
Right.
just skip it, We will do low-value things and we don't do it.
Yeah, actually that's helpful. So one point which you mentioned, I just want to bring it up again. So if we compromise on certain things in our life, we'll see some bad effects also. Like you say, if we compromise on sleep, it'll impact our health. So one such important thing is a regular family prayer. So how can we ensure that in our life we have a regular family prayer?
Yeah, I think a lot of people admit or not, I don't know, but I've seen many people struggle with this, especially with how our lifestyle is now. So family prayer concept in the olden times, I think, was pretty good and pretty easy, because normally people would be done by 6, 7 o'clock. I'm just giving an average. And then the whole evening was there. There was no TV, no internet, nothing like that, right? And so people had it. Now the challenge is the work schedule is another important thing. So even in some European countries now, everything stops after 5 o'clock. The shops all close. So there is a lifestyle which is suitable for and the evening can be family time. But now,
Work-life balance. Yeah.
work-life balance.
Yeah.
But nowadays, a lot of people work in the evenings, including in my own home. My wife works in the evening right now, and kids, and there are different challenges.
Kids'
also.
activities.
Kids'
School
activities,
stuff,
church meetings could be another one. So now the important question is, how do you maintain that? I will give you some tips, which I don't know everybody can follow, but I will tell you what works out in my own case. Number one thing, you have to understand that unless and until you don't realize the priority behind something, it's very important. It's like exercise, it's like sleep, it's like anything else in life, right? So once you are convinced that something is important, you will give time for it. So unless and until somebody is not convinced about that, it's not going to work. The second thing I would tell you is you have to find a time which will work. What I mean by that? So in our case, evenings are not going to work, because otherwise we'll have to wait till midnight, right? So that's not going to happen. So what we have done very recently is we have kept it early in the morning, 6 o'clock, right? So it's a sacrifice. Sometimes people are sleeping late, but that's a time where it's very unlikely for you to have any other meetings or any other conflicts, right? So at least if we keep that time very, close, then we can actually make sure that it happens. The other thing I would say is each family will have to sit down and make sure that they find the time where very less conflicts and disruptions are there, very less. Because I would say if a family decides we're going to do family prayer at 5 p.m., very likely that you will have a lot of disruptions, right? Some people will be late from the work and all those things. Right. If somebody says we will do at 10 p.m., you will be half asleep, that's another issue. So some people will think that we will finish up everything, then we will do. That's also a challenge. So that's something. So same time per every day is very critical. If you can manage that, that's important too. And regular habit. And I will also say that every day the atmosphere in your family prayer may not be same. Sometimes you may feel more energetic some days, but that's fine as long as consistency is there. I think one of the biggest challenge even in family prayer is consistency. And my personal advice is that people should sit down if they are struggling with it and find a time when everybody will be energized. Even if you have kids, they should be energized. I know morning is not easy, but you'll have to try hard and make sure, because if you really value the importance of a family prayer, you should do that. That's the way I look at that whole topic.
Yeah, actually, I like the point which you said, like, we need to have a consistency, and along with that, we need to sit and figure out a time which is like least interruptive and where we don't find any other interruptions.
Yeah, and also I like the other point you said too, where if you do it like late at night and once everything's done, everything will never be done.
Yeah.
And then you'll end up being half asleep and not giving the importance to God that He deserves.
Yeah. And one more thing I will just add, if you miss something once, it's easy for you to miss twice.
Right.
Even when sometimes we talk about church meetings and schedule, I said don't skip something.
Right.
Even if 1 or 2 people are there. The reason is, if you, and this applies to everything, if you skip once something in your life,
You want to skip
you will feel more comfortable in skipping the next time.
Right.
So it's like, okay, if one day the family prayer was missed, the second time you won't feel it, and then very soon you will get into a mode where even if you miss, you don't even feel like we missed it. Right? That's the thing. And the other thing is, if you have little children, it's very important that they learn that from the beginning, that this is important, because if we don't do it in our homes, they won't grow up knowing that it's a priority, it's an important thing.
So then that brings me to, what I was going to talk about next. I know you went into it a little bit before, but just, different people prioritize things different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I prioritize things differently. Biju, you might prioritize things
That's
differently.
right, yeah.
So how would you prioritize things?
Yeah, so I would just quickly summarize this. So I would say that one thing I said is I said I have a to-do list where I add things. I schedule times when it should be, what's the deadline for it. Then I also have my calendar where I move things to the calendar. And, there is a whole system where I check when is the due date coming, is there enough time for it, and all those things, right? So I guess a lot of people know about it. But important thing I want to say is from the prioritization is what do you value in life, right? So I always look at from something where does it have an eternal impact or is it going to be a short-term impact. So if something is there with a long-term impact, yes, absolutely, I value those things. So one of the thing I value is from the perspective of kingdom impact. Is it having a kingdom impact or not? And because when you didn't have much to do when I was younger and when I didn't have much to do, you could do everything. Right. But now it's like, okay, if you do something, it may take you 2 hours, but if you pay $5, somebody else will do for you. What would you do? Is it like you are going to spend 2 hours to do? But if you're passionate about something, that's a different story. But I'm saying about, practically speaking, a lot of times we have to prioritize it. But maybe that 2 hours can be used by you to do something which will have a long-lasting impact. So you have to prioritize that. So one example I will tell you is, we should always be mindful about developing others too. So if I do something and I may be the only one able to do it, but if I can train 5 people to do the same things, it will have a long-lasting impact. So again, since I said a lot in the earlier question,
Yep.
I will summarize it by saying that you have to really look at what is going to bring a long-term impact and you have to prioritize it.
Yeah, along with that, so my next question is more about the decisions which you make. So suppose if there are 2 things or more than one thing which is scheduled at the same time. So how do you decide and how do you prioritize, or how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I will give you one example. So let's say there are 2 meetings or 2 places where I need to go. So the question is, how do I decide, right? Again, I would say value and impact, and also what would be the lasting result of that. So, for example, and then sometimes it's your priority. So let's say I can think of one good example, right? I'm doing my thesis this year. Sometimes I have paper due. So paper due date is not going to change. It's not going to change.
That's right.
But I can always reschedule a trip to Mall of America. I can
Right.
always go later too.
Yeah.
or something else, right? So if I have to meet somebody or if I am planning to play or something, that all. But so you have to really see what is of more importance and more priority. And sometimes it could be based on some relationship too, right? So you can do it. But I would normally go by what is the eternal impact. If I show up here, will it be of any benefit to others? And does it align with my own life mission? So those are the criteria on the basis of which I would approach that.
That's actually helpful. So I just want to take one point out of it. Like you said, like to take decisions which will have a long-lasting impact or which will impact your future. So that's actually really helpful.
Absolutely. And then I've also wondered, Pastor, I know that we each have our own ways of thinking about time, but what does the Bible say, when it comes to prioritizing time and figuring out your time?
Yeah. So what I would really want to do is I would read some Bible verses, and I think that itself will make it very clear about few things. There are many verses which talks about time, but Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says like this: He has made everything beautiful in its time. It's talking about God. He has also set eternity in human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end, right? So one thing is, everything is done by God. We are not by an accident. We are here by God's purpose. And God has given us a time. And Bible says, the life of a man may be 70 or 80. So we have limited time. So, it's shorter than what we think. And each day we are getting closer to our finishing line or end, or our death, if I have to say it plainly. The other thing I want to remind everyone is Proverbs 21 verse 5 says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty. So, the plans are, it's not bad to plan, but you cannot plan in a bad sense. I will get to that. There is a verse for that. Bible talks about somebody who thought, I will gather everything, this rich man, and he thought I will enjoy my rest of my life. But what happened is, that same night his life was demanded. So it is not in our hands. Proverbs 27:1 says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." So we should be humble in our life, and we should value each time, each day. Actually, sometimes we should actually be thankful for the Lord for that day, and then you will not be worked up about things. A lot of times people are so worked up, tensed, and about different things. Sometimes they are so tensed about what will happen next month. But I would say that, okay, that's fine. You should be thinking about it, but don't get worried beyond that time, because that's not in our hands. James 4:13-17, that's a very interesting passage. It says, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do that, this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and does not do it, it is a sin for them." So basically what it says is, tomorrow is not in our hands. It's in God's hands. So what we should do is, if it's in God's will, we will do it. So we should have that trust in God, and that perspective should be there about our time. Finally, I would read one more, not one more, actually 8 verses from the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, which is a classical scripture portion about the time. It says that there is time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search, a time to give up, a time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So, in summary, what I want to say is, through the whole, conversation we had today is, everyone has to understand that our time is limited. Whatever lifespan God has given us, every day is important, every week is important. So we have to really value this. And Bible also talks about this talents, the parable of the talents, where. So I think time is a very important gift which God has given to us. So we should see how we are utilizing this time. Are we using it for things which will have eternal impact? Are we using it for things which will positively impact and help others? Do we have a value system we follow? And that should be biblical value system. And also, I would say, what is our call in life, basically? What is God wants us to do? And do we have a mission? And do we align things with mission? At the same time, there are some things which are mandatory. If somebody says, okay, in order to fulfill the mission for my life, I will stop coming to the church, and that's not good even. So what I mean to say is, there are some things which we need to do, but at the same time, we need to understand what God wants us to do and invest our time and energy into fulfilling God's purpose through our lives.
Awesome. And a lot of our listeners and myself, Viju, I'm sure we can all relate. We get so wrapped up a lot in our own things that we don't even think about. Every day God gives you that day itself is a blessing. Every hour, every minute is a blessing, and everyone gets so wrapped up in it. So just to our listeners, to listening, that you like Pastor said, good point. We have to think about every day is a blessing from God.
Yep. Thank you, Pastor.
And with that, we're going to wrap up today's edition. And thanks again, Pastor, for coming. And Viju, you guys have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure talking to you both again.